Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This month's theme is One More Day. It's a tribute to Recovery Month and World Suicide Prevention Day, which is observed on September 10th, 2024. I looked up the word recover, and then it's first recorded in Middle English in 1300 and 1350. It comes from the Middle French word recouvrer. I'm probably brutalizing, but one thing that really struck me is what the meanings for it later. The word recovery has many meanings, including regaining something or someone, or to obtain something that was previously lost. I find that a lot of times may be the case when we think about recovery and the healing process. Today, we have a new guest. Her name is Pamela. Thank you so much for coming on and joining us and discussing and sharing your insight on this topic of one more day. Thank you for coming here.
Oh, thank you. I'm looking forward to speaking with you today, and I appreciate the opportunity.
No problem. I like to share a disclaimer. If you're in the States, 988 is the suicide crisis lifeline. But I have been sharing other countries because it's world suicide, and a lot of my listeners are not just from the United States. So if you are in Germany, is 112. Suicide hotline is 800-11011, and Ghana emergency is 999. Suicide hotline is 2332-44-71279, and Greece, the emergency line is only 1018. So I just encourage wherever you are in the world to find a resource, especially you want to wait till it's too late. Always find that person, colleague, church member, family friend, whoever it is, to ask the question that as adults, it's hard for us to ask, I need help. So in that regards, I say, Pamela, people have said it so much better than me when it comes to certain ideas and concepts. So I'm going to start off with Albert Einstein. He says, failure is success in progress. What comes to mind when you hear this, and anything you want to share insight?
Oh, heck. Yes. Of course, you would do Albert Einstein, one of the most genius people in the world. But yeah, I know for me personally, and I think a lot of times in our society, we strive not to fail. Mm-hmm. And in that, we never get to the meat of what is really going on within within us. And failure brings things to the forefront that allow us the awareness to maybe make changes and shift our life direction in accordance to really more authentic way of living. And so I think a lot of times people view failure as something totally to avoid and totally bad. But in reality, there's that silver lining in failure, that if you can shift your perspective and not get pulled down into the whole failure mentality, that months, years later, you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't see how important that failure was to my life and how I grew through that failure.
Yeah, and I love that you said that, because a lot of times I learned the most from the things I messed up in versus the things that I do well in. Let's just be honest. But it's also funny how we look at words. I mentioned recovery, but also the idea of anger. Anger in itself, there's many reasons to be angry. It's what we do with it. Other thing is, stress. A lot of times right now, everyone's overstressed. Everyone's overworked. Everyone's over everything. But stress in itself is not necessarily always bad. Sometimes stress may be that kind of, may cultivate me or motivate me to get up, do what I'm doing, be responsible, be motivated. And so stress in itself, the word of it, the idea of it, the concept is not always so bad. And I do love that you mentioned that a lot of times we see failure. We want life to fit in a box. Unfortunately, it doesn't. And I feel, unfortunately, as human beings, I'll say this because a lot of my listeners are either they're faith-based or they're not. It's not this website, this podcast is not about proselytizing. However, it's about hope. And for me, I encourage all hopes and all forms. And one thing I noticed real quick when it comes to um, how we deal with uncertainty is we kind of what you described. We kind of say, you know what, I'm going to put these parameters. I've been told this all my life. I see it a lot, in church settings. I've done everything right. Why did this happen to me? And it's more complex than people give credit to in church settings, because you're going there, and every family dynamic is different. Every social and economic, every problem is different. I mentioned this. Another pastor shared this. But also the concept I've experienced myself being a church leader in the past is, someone say, "Oh, praise God, someone was able to beat cancer," or like in the sense our remission. While at the same time, I know in the same pew, someone lost someone from cancer the same week. So it gets a lot complicated when it comes to these uncertainty. And I understand the willingness, the motivation that is to say, I want things to fit in the box. But like I said, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And I think one of the things that I've come to understand, I grew up in church, and I took some time away from church because I felt like I was to make it more clear, God was like, okay, I'm your teacher now, because for so long I was indoctrinated with church, and of course there's great things with church, but once I stepped away, I let him out of the box. Yeah. And when I did that, some new revelation was shown to me, and more than anything, he's concerned about our soul, and we're concerned about our life. But he uses our life to save our soul. And a lot of people don't make that correlation, and I know I didn't either. But a lot of times when something terrible happens in our life, or even within the body, it's really God trying to get our attention and say, hey, what you're doing isn't working for your soul, and the light of your soul needs some healing. It needs some transformation. And if unfortunately as human beings, when we're comfortable, we're not going, oh, how can I change to be better? Or how, we're not like introspecting, like, oh, what does my soul need? Yeah. And so unfortunately he allows, problems in our life, problems in our body to kind of break through and start working to heal our soul and bring it back to its authenticity. And I liked how you said about recovery, because both definitions, I'm like, oh, that's really good. Because you're recovering something that was lost. And all of us, no matter who we are, we've lost our identity, our true divine identity. And so, recovery is part of remembering who we are. And then the other part, I wrote it down because I was like, oh, that's so good. And to regain someone, regain your true self, So I thought that was a good way that you described that recovery. And I think all of us, in some sense, are on this road to recovery, even if we don't have a necessarily addiction of any kind or anything going on. We're all God's trying to recover our soul and to that our divine essence of who we are.
And I was thinking, I mentioned this in other podcasts, but one of my good friends, they mentioned that our lives are always unfinished. I remember it was an interesting dialogue that we're having back and forth, and I do find that's very true. If we're allowing ourselves to understand that, unfortunately, life is finite, and now I'm not going to be on the ideas of faith or whatever, but in the concept of where we are in this world, we start, that's when our life begins. But then our story doesn't ever really finish. No matter if I get that promotion, no matter if I move somewhere else, the story continues to be unfinished. And I would encourage those who are listening that you want it to be unfinished, because now you have the opportunity to learn and grow, like you
Yeah.
said. And I think as human beings in this world, not to placate, but if a dog, uh, when I was growing up, I have many dogs. If they did something bad, they'll feel bad for that
Mhm.
moment. But most times, it's like that's a nice simplicity. But as we have humans have the ability to reflect, and that's
Mhm.
one thing a lot of no other animal really in this world does. Like a dog doesn't think 3 weeks later, why was I such a bad dog? It really
Yeah.
is just that moment to moment. Um,
Yeah.
and sometimes we're kind of envious. I would say myself to have that kind of relief pitcher kind of mentality. I say this because I like baseball, but I remember like when someone like throws does a pitch and everyone scores on base, and then he has to go out there pretending that he's still gonna be okay. So I
Yeah.
feel that there is uses for that, but at the same time, I do feel the concept of growth, reflection is a big part of it. We could go and talk about this more and more, but I want to go to the next kind of quote from it's an anonymous a person who says, "I'm bent but not broken. I'm scarred but not disfigured. I'm sad but not hopeless. I'm tired but not powerless. I'm angry but not bitter. I'm depressed but not giving up." It's interesting, and I'll ask you what your thoughts are. That a person recognizes all these feelings, all these thoughts, all these, but they choose something else. They choose to feel a different way. And I only feel this whether you're someone who's faith based or someone who's just able to see past the grayness, past the
Mhm.
shade, to be like,
Yeah.
okay, this is sucking right now, but it's not going to suck forever. And I'm going to, working one problem at a time. What comes to mind when you see this quote, Pamela?
Yeah. No, couple things because I know for people that have grown up in some kind of faith, we have heard over and over that we're broken, and I have always that just has never resonated with my soul. So I love that we're not broken because we're not. We make mistakes and all that, but our mistakes don't define us. Our life doesn't define us. So I love that part of that, and I feel like as far as the feelings that come up, I think a lot of people get sucked into their feelings rather than just letting them pass through. And I think what you were mentioning, if you can stay in a positive mindset, even when, it doesn't mean that you ignore what's going on, but the worst thing you can do is victimize it or make excuses for it. And if you just try to stay above it, then like you don't get sucked in. And I like to say, just let them pass through. There's nothing wrong with being angry, sad, mad, whatever.
Yeah.
The full expression. Because I think a good analogy is, or just a good descriptor is, if you watch a young baby, they go through all the emotions whenever they're feeling them, but then it's over. Kind of like you said, like the dog. They don't dwell on it. They don't keep replaying it in their mind 100 times. They're just like, they feel it, they let it go, and they release it, and they kind of move on. Which for us humans, it's hard for us to do that because our mind wants to keep playing back and forth. And I like to remind people that thing that's playing in your head over and over isn't your own voice. It's like the voice of all your trauma, the voice of all your hardship experiences that you had. And it's really not your own voice. So if you can I think guarding your mind is one of the top things a person can do when they're feeling, like you said, in those somewhat negative feelings.
Yeah, and I feel like when we think about feelings and defining what feelings are there for, one thing I like to preface is it's not like, oh, feelings are not important. They are important. It's important to recognize if I'm sad or if I'm all of a sudden really angry with my wife, disproportional to what is going on. That's something to keep mind of,
Yeah.
reflect on. However, feelings do pass, like you mentioned, and it's just something that I feel if we're reminded of them passing, if we're reminded of the process it may take, and I do feel that there may be some comfort through the distress. There may be the comfort that, I ask this question sometimes, and it doesn't always work for all concepts, but I ask myself, will this problem affect me in a year, in a month? And these kind of concepts, you kind of sift through some of the ones that maybe just immediately distressing, and maybe you're in your work environment, you're like, I don't understand why XYZ. Why did I get not the full bonus versus why did I get a portion? I don't get it. Then you gotta ask yourself, so how this can and you gotta obviously decide where is this thought gonna go? It's gonna get stuck in you, and how will this impact you in a month, a year, and all this stuff? So sometimes we could get stuck in the most trivial things. It could be just something that is a lot of information that senior management you don't know about, but you still did pretty well. You're just like, are you gonna stay there, or are you gonna move forward? And some of those things are very therapeutic if you're able to get there and remind yourself.
I think too, where people make a mistake is that they don't have an understanding of emotion versus feelings. Emotions come from your inner soul. And so, you don't have to say to yourself, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry. I need to cry, I need to cry. They just show up. But then our feelings, on the other hand, come from our external environment most of the time, because someone makes us feel a way, or sometimes those silly thoughts in our heads that we get where we start feeling bad for ourselves. And those are more reflective of, okay, I need to stand back and take awareness here. I think we get lost in that because the emotions are there because they're bringing something forward that you need to say, release, act. But the feelings are just those kind of trickery things that kind of want to keep us bound, and so if we manipulate us in certain ways, so if we can have a distinction between the two, it kind of helps with the awareness of how to better deal with our feelings and emotions. Because like you said, if you don't get the promotion that you were or the promotion or the big bonus that you were expecting, disappointing, yes, but then a lot of it's like ego related. Okay, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of like you have to kind of balance and look at it and go, okay, why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? And kind of have an awareness. And even though it still stinks.
It does still stink, but at the same time, I think with feelings, there's a risk of reacting, and if you're able to pause, it's always good. And it's good. I don't know, best practice, I would say, or it's just good practice in general, is to pause before saying anything. Pause, if we're led by our feelings, unfortunately, we may end up with a legal issue, if we're being honest. And I'm saying this not to be coy or to minimize those who are struggling out there, but we just have to remember our emotions run hot, but they sometimes go as fast as they come in. So we have to be reminded of ourselves. And then if you are in a situation that you feel this way, find a way to, sometimes if you go to therapy or you go speak to, coping skills are out there. There's a bunch of stuff that may be helpful to help with immediate kind of overwhelmingness. And I still to this day do practice some deep breathing. I do we breathe all the time, but when we focus on it, just regular deep breathing, it does kind of calm ourselves. But as I do want to mention, just to get a little bit forward, I want to switch gears. There was a letter that I read from the U.S. Surgeon General from last year, and it was interesting. The title says, "Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation." I thought it was an intriguing read. I didn't read the entirety of it, but I did read a good portion. And in the beginning, he kind of explains some of the reasons, or some of the, I guess, the motivation, not really but in a very general sense. But I do like some of the verbiage he uses. It says loneliness and isolation represents a profound threat to our health and well-being. And I feel now a lot of times when it comes to the idea of loneliness, especially with some of these notable celebrities who passed away from suicide and those kind of things, we're reminded that we are all vulnerable, whatever class, whatever social economic, whatever background. I feel a little bit closer to home in the sense that I'm half of I'm half South Korean. So South Korea right now, unfortunately, is has the highest suicide rate in the whole world. So for me, I guess it hits home when I think about just the pressures, the overwhelmingness. I ask you, Pamela, how are you doing? Most times people will say, busy. Busy. They don't it used to be okay for a while, but that went and gone after the 90s or something. It was like a blip, and then now everyone's saying they're busy. So he goes on and says, and we can ensure our country and world are better poised than ever to take on the challenge that lay ahead. Our future depends on what we do today. So there's an urgency. And this is from the Surgeon General about the idea of like isolation and loneliness. I could be alone and be fine. I could be lonely and not be fine. I could be around people and be lonely. So it's an interesting concept. It's interesting that, you know, even at that level that they're bringing it up. I think after COVID, it's understandable that we went through whatever position politically you were at. It was a time where everyone was kind of bottled up their own little bubbles. So any thoughts that when you think about just a concept of loneliness and isolation in recovery, what comes to mind, and anything else you want to add?
For me, there was a time in my life that I felt very lonely. And fortunately, a little neighbor lady, I was on the porch just like in a state of despair, and a little neighbor lady flipped on her light like at 2 a.m. And called me over to her house, and she began to just, I don't know like what I want to say, but just speak into me about how you have this whole team of that we can't see, spiritual forces, and you don't have to believe in a God or anything to have this available to you. And she started teaching me, like, you know, start asking for help and start, you know, interacting with these things we cannot see. And interestingly enough, as I did some of the things that she suggested, I began to experience that I was never alone, even though, you know, personally, you know, of course, it's nice to have companionship and all that, but just knowing that opened my whole eyes to how important I was and how loved I was by this unforeseen field. And that really just helped me get out of a phase of loneliness and start being maybe more confident to engage, you know, whether it was get out there and do volunteer work. Because I know that when you're lonely, one of the best things, or struggling, one of the best things you can do is go help somebody else. And, you know, in doing those things, it just really opened my eyes to feeling good, even when I was physically alone without people around, to know that I really wasn't alone. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I know a lot of people struggle with the whole loneliness thing because there's no person, you know, maybe in their life or a good friendship. But when you can connect to that field, whatever you want to call it, it's a game changer for your whole life.
And I do hear what you're saying, and I do feel that, you know, it is, you know, a lot of times when we depend our how to say our self-validation externally, we come into problems. I'll tell you why, because life keeps happening, and unfortunately, I'll say this: people will disappoint you, even though they're trying the best they can. And I do find, like, I do encourage, whether it is a higher, even in AA, they would say a higher power is very helpful. They base it all around that
Yeah.
concept, but also just something bigger than yourself. So whether you're faith based or not, I would even say purpose. Purpose could
Yeah.
be it's intangible, but something that drives you, that you
Mhm.
won't feel as lonely. You're working. A lot of times I was in the Air Force during 2004, so that was during the 9/11
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
coming up, and I just a lot of times when it was struggle being so young at that time, it was just working a problem, one problem at a time. That was very conducive. I was just out of high school, so you can
Mhm.
imagine how it felt when everything was changing so fast. Coming in 2000, August 2000, Air Force 2001. The next year, we have the biggest monumental thing that had happened, sad thing that happened in New York City and always the Pentagon and also in Pennsylvania. I'm reminded of just for that time, I remember just being overwhelmed and just working one problem. I worked on the flight line, working on planes, and I remember just feeling overwhelmed. And it was just one thing that was helpful was having a purpose. Okay,
Mhm.
and I wasn't faith based back then, and I do find it helpful to have bigger ideas than yourself when it comes to these things.
Yeah. No,
And
for sure.
we could get a lot of times we get in our way of our own recovery. I do like it
Yeah.
that you mentioned also volunteering and helping. I always kind of say, especially in concept of healing, helping others became my healing.
Mhm.
And so that is something that I feel has been at least part of what has been helpful. Because one thing is that we need to connect. When we're not
Yeah.
connecting, it does, and sometimes we need to connect with ourselves and
Yeah.
first before we connect with others. Because unfortunately, communication has lackluster. And I'll say this for everyone. Yeah, a
Yeah.
family gathering, everyone's on their phone. They're
No
not talking.
kidding. No kidding. Well, that's what I was going to mention. I know, like now, I think more loneliness is more prevalent simply because of technology.
Mhm.
Um, you know, don't tell my age, but when I
Mhm.
was a kid, we didn't have that stuff, so you had to talk to people, and
Mhm.
at the dinner table,
Mhm.
yeah, could you sit there and eat? But no,
Mhm.
there was conversation, and I think people just are uncomfortable with putting their phones down, and I think that is a big. If you could break the addiction of phone, I mean, that's maybe one of the bigger addictions, and start, looking people in the eye and just saying hello and those kind of things and practicing your communication skills.
Mhm.
That in itself would help, um,
Mhm.
with the loneliness and help you connect to people, because it's hard connecting to people when you're looking down on your phone, and and also we know from studies the phones just um, cause so many internal problems with self-esteem and feelings, and
Mhm.
like you said, it doesn't connect, it interferes with your connection back to yourself and back to that
Mhm.
authentic person that is not broken, and who is
Mhm.
so greatly loved and who has this purpose to be here, that maybe has gotten sidetracked because of all the stuff that you're scrolling through on
Mhm.
your phone and all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. So
Yeah. I like to say, working in the mental health field, I say to my clients, "Are you allowed to be better?" And a lot of times that's a deeper question when you think about it. I want to segue a lot of time. Well, I like to give an opportunity to those, my guests, my new guests, my returning guests, to kind of share a little about themselves, any updates. But since you're new, we'll be sharing a little bit about your story, what brings you here, what motivates you, anything you like or comfortable sharing. The floor is yours, Pamela.
okay, well, I since we're talking about recovery month, I just want to encourage anybody who's struggling. Number one, that they're not alone and
Mhm.
that there is a purpose for their life. And in the times where I had struggled, when I started kind of doing what you said, connecting back to myself and
Mhm.
connecting to something greater than myself, it
Mhm.
made all the difference. And I, interestingly, being in church my whole life, nothing compared to what happened when I let, I'm going to use the word God, but I don't care what you call it, God out of the box, and let myself out of the box of restricted way of living, and started, learning and growing and changing. And it just makes all the difference when you can kind of get into that recovery state where it's like, okay, this is not who I am. There's something greater for me, and I have help to get me to the next highest, I like to say, getting to your next highest good place of who you are. And like you said before, it just continues and continues. So basically what I did through my whole growth process of recovery to get back to myself, I penned in a book called Spiritual Springboard. And it kind of looks like that. You can find it on Amazon. But it's full of tools and motivational stories of people who use the tools. I teach you how to use tools to kind of connect to this field, and so that you can have an experience. Because, you can believe something all you want, but until you have an experience of it, then it's truth. So that will help you have an experience and get you back to feeling like you matter and that you're cared for. And it's really just, it's a springboard for the new version of you that's getting ready to blossom. Because I always say, when somebody's going through something rough, I'm like, yes, because this is the potential. When you're going through something rough, it's the springboard to take you to new heights. And if you can look at it and change your perception, that just, lets you get onto the springboard instead of, hanging tight into your little box. So anyway, that's what I do. I also do healing work with people over Zoom or in an office setting, where I help remove some of the blockages that might be preventing them from receiving, because that's the bigger issue here when we're talking about healing. And it's available to you, but how are we unintentionally getting in the way of our own healing? So those are some of the things that I do to kind of help people rediscover themselves and restore and recover.
Thank you, Pamela. I want to share with those who are listening, watching. Find out more. It will be in the notes. You could click and find out more about what Pamela is doing. I was thinking about just you're mentioning just the process of when you're having a bad time. Like when someone's going through a bad time, you're like, yes, this means that things are moving, in a sense, moving forward. I think the real tragedy is when we're in the minutia of mediocrity. And we don't know that there's no problem. Everything's great. Unfortunately, that the lukewarmness can be, catastrophic, because you don't really know that there is a problem. I think the worst problems are the ones we don't know of. So reflecting and understanding and being forgiving to yourself. A lot of times we kind of look at things through a perspective of life that are not your context. Your own background. A lot of times we can be our hardest critics, and that could be its own barrier towards something new. And like I said in the beginning, if it doesn't work, if nothing changes, nothing changes. But even more so, I like when I'm with a client or I'm working with someone and we go through it all, the person's telling me everything, and we get to the point, because there's this trust, whatever setting. And I say this sometimes, I'm like, it hasn't worked. So like a lot of times that realization can be a like you say, springboard to notice that, hey, well, all that I've been doing is the same thing I have always done, and it hasn't worked. So that can be helpful. And also, I used to say this, and it sounds weird to say it this way, but if you're the smartest person in the room, you may need to go another room. So that's a weird way of saying it, but the idea is there's seasons of life. So
for sure. I think that's a great thing, because like you said, you got to keep growing and keep moving. And one thing I like to tell people too, because I'm really about the soul and healing the soul, because your inner, whatever's happening on the outer is a reflection of what's going on the inner. So if you want to change your outer circumstances, you do it from within. And as you work from within, and I don't care if it's mental, physical, or relational, obviously you can say, well, my wife is being a hellion or whatever, put the blame on her. But what ends up happening when you change within you, something happens to people around you also. So it's kind of like once you start transforming, everyone around you has to start transforming, or they have to leave your space.
Yeah.
So, it's a soul thing. And I like to remind people that, if you don't like what's going on in your world, or, you're struggling with addiction or something, it's a springboard to heal something within you so that your life can move into a better direction.
Yeah. And just the idea, the concept of just working on you first is always kind of, I would say, encouraged, because you will live with you. We'll just say that way.
For sure.
No matter what exterior, because that's the one thing I would say can temporary kind of distract, is like monetary. If you're monetary affluent and you just kind of just buy happiness for a while.
Oh, for sure.
So it's one thing to remind Hunter S. Thompson says it this way. I kind of mentioned this in a different way, but I don't see how you can respect yourself. You must look in the hearts and minds of others for your happiness. It's not that you don't, obviously this is not saying we don't see companionship. It's not saying any of that. But if you yourself are not happy, no matter where you go, you'll be unhappy there too. So it's important that you focus on yourself. If I want to be a good husband to my wife, I have to take care of myself to be that, and vice versa. So it's not just like, it's sometimes we have this, like this kind of, desperate kind of. We see it in the movies a lot of times, but those are a lot of times not the most healthiest, because they end. Yeah. The movie ends at the end, so usually we have to be mindful of what the message is saying there. But I want to, one thing I want to say is, it's been a real pleasure to have you on, Pamela. I have a few things I want to ask you regarding. We did talk about loneliness, but I want to talk about one more day. It's a theme I came up last year, and I thought was, especially this month, a lot of times it's that small segment of time that the person needs. And, a lot of times with suicide, it's, I've attempted. So like, it's just, the idea is that, if we can get to the point when we're feeling this way, even before, to get the help we need, to work on ourselves. Sometimes one more day will be just like, I don't feel good, I don't want to get out of bed, but I'm going to try to go and get dressed and try to do something, whether it's small, those kind of things. So one more day is kind of one of those things where we're giving ourselves the avenue of being human and healing, are allowed to get better. So what comes to mind when you think about this?
Well, I love that, because I think, again, in our world, we think we have to get from point A to point B in a split second. And we always want the quick fix, but the quick fix just puts you stagnant. And, it's kind of like you band-aiding whatever it is, whether you're band-aiding through fight, where you're saying like shopping or alcoholism or whatever it is, you're just band-aiding. But if you can just, like you said, just think one more day, I've got this, just one day at a time, and try to stay as present as you can in that day. And I think the big thing in that is guarding your mind from the voices, that want to pull you down, and just one step at a time. I can't remember who, I wish I could pull that quote out. I think it was Martin Luther King Jr. He says, you're not going to see the whole staircase. You just take the one step, and then you'll see the next step. And if you can, like you said, on those days that are tough, just one step, no matter what it is, and knowing that tomorrow, you're going to see the next step. And I think a great thing, just one more day, and knowing that you don't have to go crazy. You're gonna be guided, and you're gonna be taken care of as long as you just take that step.
Yeah, and one thing, as we wrap up, I was thinking about. I haven't mentioned it for a bit because I used to mention it a lot when I read "Man Finding Meaning" from Viktor Frankl. I remember reading that, and I remember it was interesting his observations. The people who survived during the Holocaust, were mentioned in that time period. We're not the pessimists as we kind of expected, not the optimists either. It's interesting. It was more the people who just thought there was another day. Sometimes the optimist will be like, "And March still comes rescue us," but he would say, and I'm paraphrasing, that the person who took care of themselves took care of others too. So they'll have bread, they'll give half of it. They take care of the community, but more so, it doesn't have this finite thing of, oh, this particular, they're going to come then, because the disappointment be overwhelming, and sometimes they don't. This is some of the observation, but one thing that was apparent was the people who thought one more day. I'm just using this quote. He didn't say one more day, but the hope that something will happen. They will be rescued eventually, and working on themselves day by day is what I saw. So some people who are pessimistic thought it was reckless. Why would you give half your bread to a person? You need to take care of yourself. But that kind of mindset was so overwhelming. A person who was too optimistic, it was hard because we're human beings and we're wanting to go through this. So it was interesting to hear his concept of that. And I feel when we think about healing, we have to also think about our inner self, like you mentioned, and in the sense that we don't have all the information. We never will have all the angles of any decisions we make. However, we know ourselves, and we know the evidence. If we remember some of that, it may help us down the road when it comes to those moments in life when you have to say one more day.
One more day, yeah.
Any final thoughts, Pamela?
I would just say too, like if you have someone that's listening that's really struggling and maybe into that suicidal time, I think it's valuable to remind people that it doesn't show weakness to ask for help.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of people put on a facade that they're okay, but the minute you ask for help, then all of a sudden you'll find all these other people who have already gone through what you've gone through, or so you're not alone in what you're going through. Yeah. And so don't be afraid to ask for help, because people, even if they look like they got it all together, most of the time they don't, So I like to encourage people, don't think you're the only one, or, that you don't have it, that you can't ask for help, because that is where the real courage lies, is being able to say, hey, I'm struggling and I need some help. And I think that's the more courageous choice than taking your life.
Yeah.
Is being willing to, face it. And,
and unfortunately, I would say, sadly, it's all, it's the environment. So I encourage those who are maybe someone who's caring with someone who is really struggling, because I would, a lot of times when you think about, I believe in my mind that there's concepts and understanding a culture and things that I will never understand, and that's okay. So I would like to tell those people who lost someone from suicide that I'm sorry for your loss. I want to share with those communities who are affected that, and also just mind you, like, the thing I want to also mention is I had a guest a couple months ago. I thought it was very interesting. He said that he would call his friends that were really exceptional at whatever they're like, maybe good at music, and he would say, I appreciate you for this or whatever. And he said he did that. Like he kind of made it a point that he would do that, because what he found out was people don't really realize they're good at anything. Nowadays, everything's so fast. There's a saturation of everything. So, what I'm trying to encourage you, those who are listening, if you have a friend who's always so funny at parties or really personable, still check on them, please. Because unfortunately, we're great actors sometimes. Let's just say that. And I do. I would encourage. I like the idea. We're not. If we're able to provide environments that feel safe enough, maybe those people that will feel more open to asking for help. So whatever it is, whatever friend group and whatever work or environment you're in, don't just assume because a person's doing well in the job or doing just so exceptional and you're just like, oh, I can't. Still tell them that you appreciate them. I do encourage that. And people say to me, oh, I don't have no time. Well, when you go to a restaurant, this is the last thing I will say. If they get your order wrong, be kind. Be kind. Waitresses.
I've been a waitress.
And I would say it's not. I think that sometimes can make someone's day. Kindness, even a small degree of kindness, and that's my final thoughts. Thank you, Pamela. Anything else you want to add?
Well, I just like to piggyback what you just said. If a thought pops into your head at the grocery store, at the restaurant, like whatever it is, speak it, because that's the field needing your help to help somebody else. And I know even if someone pops into your head that you have not heard from, seen in years, pick up the phone and just do what you said. Hey, I was just thinking about you, and because I believe, just through experience, that those are not coincidences. And if a thought pops in, somebody comes to mind, you're getting poked to take action, to speak life into somebody's life, to speak life into them. So I think that was great what you said.
I just want to say thank you, Pamela, for sharing your thoughts and insights. I just love the concept of let's just be a better community to each other. Let's just be better neighbors to each other, in that regard. Remember to stay updated with Revive Ministry through the various platforms. ReviveMinistryFL.com is our website. Leaving last quote. It's from Roy McAvoy. He says, when a defining moment comes along, you can do one of two things: define the moment or let the moment define you.